Hello, I'm David Eames, and welcome to our podcast, On Your Mind. I'm joined today by Owen and Mikey, as usual, and we're going to talk today about anxiety. All right, boys, up for that?
I'm ready, yeah.
Sounds good.
Cool. Well, we're talking about it in general terms today. There are specific areas like phobias, social anxiety, fear of public speaking. There's as many ways of feeling anxious about things as there are ways of doing things. The question, first of all, I want to ask is anxiety always a bad thing?
To me,
However,
I don't think so. I think a lot of the times it keeps you safe because I suppose it always comes down to, well, my mum once said something to me. She said, if you ever get that gut feeling to not do something, just listen to it. Don't be governed by it. Because obviously I know some people anxious about flying or about certain modes of transport and whatnot. But it's always a case, like, you can acknowledge it, but don't let it ruin your life. Don't let it run everything. Mm-hmm. And I think, personally, I've been quite fortunate that I don't particularly get anxiety that controls me, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But I don't mind it being there because I think it's part of being human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what do you think, Mikey?
Always felt anxiety sounds like a scary word, quote unquote, but that feeling is a different response for me. When I get a feeling for something, I try and use my inner GPS to go along and do that thing. But it is anxiety to me, and just my way of perceiving it and understanding it, feels like the tipping point of that feeling. And that's where I make all the wrong decisions, because I've gone irrational and I'm not thinking about the situation, and it is governing my thoughts then. So that's just maybe a difference of understanding for the word and what the word means, anxiety. But I've always put, when I'm feeling anxiety, that's when I've tipped scale. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think what's coming through is anxiety is one word which covers a multiple types
it's
of feelings.
Massive, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge. So let's take the word stress, for instance. A lot of people might talk about feeling stressed. But is it really stress, or is it being challenged by things? I like to make a differential that stress is where you've got no control over what's happening. So if someone's in a job and they might be made redundant, that's a stressful situation to be in.
Yes.
But if you're sort of going for promotion and maybe you've got an interview to do, well, that's a challenge. It doesn't have to be stressful because you've got some control over it. You may not control the outcome, but you can control your own performance.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because especially with stress, I mean, I suppose they work hand in hand, because you can be stressed that you've lost the job and now you're anxious that you're going to have to find money from somewhere else. And do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So they're a bit of a shitty stick, which is just bundled together, that unfortunately, without coping mechanisms, you can't really move forward.
I think that was one of my coping mechanisms, and I can't remember who gave it to me, but it was just simply changing the wording. Instead of I feel anxious to this, I'm excited about this, and then turn it into excitement. And the nerves as well, when I do public speaking. My favourite quote somebody said was, nerves are the respect that you pay the audience. And that kind of relieved me of that feeling, because I thought, you know what, I just care. I just really want this to be a good experience. I like what I'm talking about. I think it's important what we're talking about, so I hope they get as much out of it as possible. And if I don't turn up, that's where the uncomfortability comes from, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, depending on the topic that you're talking about, because I've done a lot of school talks in my previous job, and my intention, even though I've got, I can have Tourette's, or I can swear a lot, or I can be just very straight speaking. Essentially, I've always wanted to represent whatever I've done professionally. So it might upset you at the core what I'm saying, but it's essentially because I'm not anxious about doing that, but I'm just conscious I don't want to upset people, but sometimes the message needs to come across, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you're coming from a loving place,
of course,
a genuine place.
But that can get in your head. I mean, one of the nicest things that I've ever heard was one of the fighters in the UFC. His name's John Jones. He's a champion. And they were speaking to him about anxiety and stress and panic and all this other stuff, because obviously a lot of these guys have to perform in their pants in front of thousands of people, and obviously when you're at the top of your game, that can be nerve-wracking. And he said it's butterflies. But the difference is the butterflies that he has, he feels that he's managed to train them to fly
with him.
Yeah.
I like that.
So he's got synchronized butterflies as opposed to ones just going all over the place.
Channeling.
I've now got an image of butterflies like the red arrows.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's lovely.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm laughing at the point you said it's because they're performing in their pants. It's not the fact that they're into going in for a fight.
Well, this is it. This is
but it's
it.
like, no, it's just because they're body conscious.
Yeah, you're fighting in your underwear. I mean, there's so many anxieties that come with that sport. But when someone from that level says something like that, and everyone's had butterflies, be it going on a roller coaster, flying, whatever it is, but to be able to visibly think, and that's the way I think. I can see them and I can manipulate them to do what I want them to do.
I love that.
It's kind of cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I think what Mikey said about redefining, it's a very important prospect, is that if you're in a war being shot at, or if you're on a roller coaster at Alton Towers, it's the same hormones running through your body that are driving it. It's just adrenaline that's doing it. So you define what you're going through, if you can, as excitement rather than fear. And then it can be enjoyable. You can ride that. You can use it. I think anxiety is a really useful thing.
Yeah.
It helps to keep you safe, on the road when it's dangerous, lots of traffic, maybe heavy rain, things like that. Be anxious.
I love the saying, though, it's simple, but it's not easy. Because I've had situations where I've gone in with that mindset, but I must admit, I've been on stage and I just didn't feel the atmosphere. I didn't feel the vibe. I'd got in my head. And then suddenly, I'm going back to old ways. I'm not getting there. The sweat comes a little bit. So do you have any techniques or ideas on when it does start tipping over?
You push on through.
You go. I really love that advice. I think that's ace.
Because you're on stage. You can run away. That's an option.
It is an option, yeah.
But
I think the further you run and the longer you leave that gap, it's harder to the anxiety. Then that's when it wins.
That's very true.
And that's for me. And I know obviously me and David mentioned a lot of our things in childhood being very similar. Something my dad said to me and David's dad said to him was, "Let him have your kid." And genuinely, when I was younger, that's something my dad used to say to me because I used to love dancing. And we went to someone's wedding and I stood on the edge and he could tell I wanted to dance, but I didn't know any of these people. He went, "Let him have your kid." And I went and danced my socks off and it was amazing. And he pushed me over the edge and he made me aware that it's all right. Nothing like there's no danger. It's just in your brain and it's keeping you stopped.
There was a book from quite a few years ago now, very popular at the time, called "Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway."
Yeah.
Which I think is a really great phrase, because the important thing is to try to avoid avoiding things because you're frightened of them.
Oh mate, I needed this podcast. I love this podcast
because the whole thing about avoidance is it's self-reinforcing. Behaviours that get rewarded, that's a reinforcement, and you're more likely to repeat behaviours that get rewarded.
Yeah.
Now, if there's something that you're frightened of, and you avoid doing it, there's part of your brain goes, "Hey, that worked. I didn't die."
Yeah.
There might have been nothing there to kill you.
Yeah.
So it's actually a null result, but it's viewed as a positive outcome.
Okay.
So you're more likely to avoid that thing again in the future. So the only way to avoid being avoidant in that behaviour is to press on in, to feel the fear and do it anyway.
So at the base level then, because obviously if there's going to be people listening to this, and if to them that I'm the annoying person that doesn't necessarily get anxiety, Mikey's experienced it and you know how to cope with it. For us to sit around and say, you just push on or you just do this or this is the answer. I know there isn't always an answer. What at the core level, what's the first thing? Is it baby steps? Is there something that you can take that you feel particularly anxious about and maybe start doing something to overcome a small thing that you can then use to move forward in the future when you get a bigger thing? Because I'm just conscious that when you watch something, it's like, when you see celebrities and stuff and they're like, "Oh, life, you just carry on, you do it." With millions of pounds, it's easy to do what you want when you want. But to have three people that go, "Anxiety, just do this." I know it's not that simple, but is there something that could work for certain people that they could maybe put in place?
Well, it depends on what it is you're frightened of.
Okay.
There are some things you can introduce yourself to slowly, gradually. So dealing with a phobia, say someone's got a phobia of spiders, then there's a way of dealing with that called program desensitization. And so you introduce maybe with small photographs of spiders, and then you can move up to videos and then maybe actual encounters of them. You also need to train in some relaxation techniques as well, so you can feel that the anxiety is manageable. But there are some things like if you've got to deliver a best man speech at a wedding, you can't really build up to it.
No, I don't suppose so.
You're in it, and so it's about taking the risk, and it is scary. That's the whole thing that we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
But it's about making that choice, and I think with things like that, often it's not as bad when you do it as you fear it's going to be in advance. So it's about learning. It's like when you learn to swim. You don't really learn to swim. You just learn that you don't have to drown.
Yeah, you can survive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the same here, that public speaking is just learning that, okay, I can do it and I don't die.
Yeah.
I think you did say something good, though, there on baby steps, because I feel when my anxiety's been at its most ripe, especially doing a performance or talking on stage, it's because I wasn't prepared and planned. So I felt, oh no, why didn't I just start earlier? Why didn't I start practicing? And when I, again, alleviate that, it's because I've gone and performed to Chrissy, or I've found a group of mates, just a couple of them, and said, can I just do this poem? Boom, I've gone and done that there. Oh, it went all right, that felt cool.
Yeah.
And then you just keep building up the crowds, and then eventually it gets bigger and bigger, and you can't see people. And you're like, oh, same amount for everybody then.
But at the same time, people can get anxiety striking them later on in their career.
Yeah.
So Sir Laurence Olivier, the most famous actor of his generation, for years couldn't go on stage because of stage fright. Harold Macmillan, who was Prime Minister in the late 50s, early 60s, was known as unflappable. That's the way people described him. He was meant to be the coolest guy around. Was always physically sick before giving a major speech to the Tory party conference.
Yeah.
And the Tory party conference was not a difficult gig for a Prime Minister in the late 1950s.
I think sometimes it comes down to the hats or however you can convince yourself. I mean, just touching back on the spider story, obviously me and Stace, again, been together forever, 20-something years, terrified of spiders. Always has been. Even to the point where she would see a spider in the day, and it was now in her brain and in her conscience that when we're in bed, she would sit bolt upright and be convinced she's seen a spider. But the main thing that she did when we had children was she didn't show them that fear. She absolutely forced herself, because for me, the logic of spiders in the UK is they can't hurt you. So in Australia, when I went to Australia, I'm conscious of them. Not scared, but I'm conscious that these can kill me. Whereas in England, I think, look, what's the worst that can happen? But I'm not like negating any of people's fears. But when she made that decision to go, no, I'm not going to pass this on to my kids. I'm definitely... And the fear in her face when like your baby comes over at 2 or 3 carrying a spider going, look, mummy. And she's like, yeah, that's brilliant. Stroke it, mummy. Stroke it. She's like, yeah, okay. But she's managed to cope, and she's way better than she was. So I think when you've got something like your little one in your life, or whoever it is, it can change, because obviously priorities change, I know, but what's more important to you becomes clearer.
It's about being able to make... She's made the choice there to face that fear and to do it.
Yeah.
And I think from that, maybe a way of helping people is realising where it's come from. This fear, because it could have been a traumatic experience, and being able to look back at that, be conscious of that, and realise that you can sort of maybe work your way around that, I hope.
Well, I suppose they all just sit in your memory library, don't they? Because if you can relate to something or return to something, and you know it's okay, even if it's not okay, but you can get back on the bike and have another go, you're trying to overwrite that bad memory. Like, one way that I know that I deal with it, especially with my kids, is either distraction. Well, it's normally is distraction, and that's in a lot of things. Like, we went to Alton Towers. We went on Friday, and Libby, she's 1.4 meters exactly, and the Smiler is exactly 1.4 meters, upside down 14 times. It's ginormous and terrifying for her. So we were making her laugh the whole time, just keep her mind off it. And when we sat on the ride, she really panicked, and I said, "Listen, I'll do you a favour. You can swear when we get to the top." All the fears vanished.
Really?
She was overwhelmed with trying to decide what swear word she's going to say. And the thing is, no one can hear it, no one can see it because we're on the top of a massive roller coaster. She let out the loudest swear word and from that moment went on every single ride.
Loving it.
I'm not saying it works for everyone,
I was
but the distraction of her to then be able to comprehend, oh my God, I've got all these words to choose.
Yeah, there's as a slight aside, there's loads of research being done to show that you can tolerate more pain when swearing.
Yeah.
When they've got people to put their hands in cold water, iced water, and if people are effing and jeffing all the time, they can hold their hands in the cold water for longer.
Well, the pain dance is a real thing, isn't it? Everyone stood on Lego or an upturned plug, and the amount of swear words that you can just string off.
Yeah. So when the anxiety gets a bit feeling intolerable, we need maybe some techniques to help to cope with that.
I was going to say to that, and just to what I said then, David, about childhood trauma or past trauma. Is it enough to just recognise it and be conscious of it, or can you do steps inside of that?
It helps, but it's not always possible. Sometimes, fear of spiders is often acquired from a parent at a very early age. Someone may have no memory of it. I had a client recently who had a fear of balloons, which was related to an incident as a very young child of older children bursting balloons at a party event, and that had been really scary, and it led to a long-term phobia of balloons. We talked through it and talked about relaxation techniques, and one of our online sessions was greeted by my client blowing up a balloon for me. So that felt...
Oh, wow.
That's a massive
That's beautiful.
I was so proud of them for doing that.
That's really lovely, yeah.
Yeah.
Mine's rats.
Really?
I remember the moment. It was at the other farm. I'll try not to get too graphic, but I must have only been 3 or 4. But we had a small farm, and my mum was always terrified of rats anyway, but one had some poison, and it was in the middle of the yard, but it hadn't died yet, so it's sort of wriggling about, but I thought it was laughing as a kid. And I was like, Mum, the rat's laughing, and she's ran off, screaming, and they got a bit of a psycho farmer to come down, and he put a shovel through the middle of it, so the rat looked down and started screaming at itself.
That's going to do it for a 3 or 4
Dude, I was only
year
5 years old. I remember it vividly, and my mum talks about it at parties, so it's always reintroduced to me. She's like, "You remember when we did the rat thing? Yeah, cried your eyes out for the whole night." I'm like, "Yeah, that was pretty bad, wasn't it?"
Still cry myself to sleep.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have started this podcast with some trigger warnings here.
I'll put it on the I'll put it on the front.
Rat warning. From now on, it'll just be the rat warning.
No, it's fine, Mike. It's fine. I'm just joking.
Wow.
So if anxiety levels are high, then the first thing to tell yourself, and this is absolute key, is it will pass. Because anxiety, it's not the thing that you fear, it's the fear of the fear that gets you.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It's
That's
that
really
thing,
cool.
oh, Christ, I'm a bit scared here. Oh, my breathing's starting to accelerate a bit now. Well, I can feel my heart starting to pound. My hands are shaking. Oh, Christ, I'm going to lose it in a bit. I'm going to make such a fool of myself. I might actually die in a bit.
Yeah.
I can relate to that, man.
And it's first thing to tell yourself is it will pass, because it always does.
It's going to be okay.
All right, the anxiety, not instantly, not necessarily, but it will pass. If it gets too severe with the breathing, there's a breathing technique I use which can be quite helpful. I call it 3x3, and that's breathe in for a slow count of 3, breathe out for a slow count of 3, and then hold for a slow count of 3, and then repeat. And a lot of breathing techniques hold breath in, but if you hold it with the breath out, it's also reducing the oxygenation in your blood a little bit, which tends to reduce the excitement levels.
I've just had a go at it then.
Yeah.
Quite enjoyed that.
It's like a hard reset.
Yeah.
I've done that before. I used to do a lot the speech and drama, and we used to have to do exams when you were quite young, and that was one of Mrs. Minion's techniques. And I always like to think of it like a hard reset, because instead of your body and your diaphragm quaking or quivering, it kind of just gives it a chance to center itself again.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because what you're doing is you're shifting your focus, and that focus, I mean, it's related to Buddhist meditation in a way.
Yeah.
It's that taking it from what's happening outside in the world to what's happening in you. You can take it a little bit further as well by maybe you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, and you can think about how the temperature of the air feels different both ways. which is another way of shifting that emphasis.
So it's that distraction, that focus
Yeah.
on something else.
And that mindful.
At the same time, you can start grounding yourself as a technique, which is maybe if you're sitting on a chair or something, touch the fabric of the chair and feel what that is. Try and think about what the textures are. And again, you're bringing yourself into the here and now, away from that fear dialogue in your mind.
I just found it really interesting. Then, as I was doing the breathing technique, on the in, I tried to hold it, and I felt a bit more uncomfortable. When you said do it on the out and hold it, I felt really relaxed then. There's something in that, isn't there?
Yeah, it's almost like you're expelling the fear in a way.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
holding it out.
I've heard in Buddhist as well, it's sort of breathing in light, and I might really picture light, and breathing away and out the darkness. That I've tried to implement in my life, and that works too.
It's one of these things. It's whatever works for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
maybe experiment a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I know for me, I know the age-old angel and devil, and I know that anxiety is real. But if something ever comes to me and tries to just get a bit too much real estate in my brain, I don't even like to acknowledge it's real. So, like when I was a kid, climbing trees and being a bit of a toe rag, I never saw the danger. So I never got into any trouble because I seemed to pass through it quite well because I was clear-minded in what I was doing. I'll never forget when we were at Egg, I climbed one of the buildings inside. I was about 7 meters, 8 meters up in the air, climbing up. And this girl said, "What if you fall?" And it was the first time in my life that I doubted myself and nearly fell. And I was like, "You idiot." But when it comes to the anxiety of public speaking or what if this or what if that, I always like to think of it that I've almost got a shield against that devil to sort of go, well, no, you're not coming in. And they can keep coming back with new ideas. That, oh, what if this happens or this or this? But I like to think to myself, but what if the good stuff happens? Because like you mentioned, best man speeches. I think I've been best man 6 times. And I love it. Because I love telling stories and I love to be able to relate to the person and I love either embarrassing them or making the other people aware of the story that they didn't know about. So I always like to think afterwards because it's always a really, really nice, warm feeling. Even eulogies. I did 2 eulogies last year and the people that come up after you help you cope with what you've lost because there's so much positive that comes out of the other end that you manage to survive. And even if you don't have anxiety, you've still survived that experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think in a future podcast, we'll do a whole podcast on public speaking because it's a big area of fear for people. And there are quite a few techniques to use in regard to that and some knowledge as well, which will be helpful.
Yeah.
So the whole thing with
demand.
fear, I think it's about realising that it's an automatic response.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not something you choose to have. So fear is never wrong. It's an important thing, and we'll return to this in many different ways, is emotions are never wrong because you don't choose them.
Okay.
But you do choose, as I said before, about what you do next, what you think next.
Yeah.
And so fear is not controllable, but you can choose in a way by your actions to make it worse. So it's choosing to not make it worse and then allowing it to die away of its own. You also get into situations sometimes of chronic anxiety, which is a whole different animal. And that is where you really can't shake the fear. You've got yourself into a situation. And that's because our brains work in a way, the primitive parts of our brain work in a way that if I've been frightened in a situation in the past, regardless of what's triggered that, there's probably a reason for that. There's probably a real danger there. So I'd better be ready for battle again.
Yeah.
And so sometimes things can be triggering us and we don't know what they are, but there's something in that situation that reminds us of that earlier situation. And we automatically fall into fear.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to that quite a lot. I think when I was younger especially. But would you say that chronic anxiety, is that what I experienced when I was waiting for my driving test? Because days before, I was struggling to sleep. I couldn't think of anything else. I couldn't really settle. And I don't tend to get like that. But it was because it was this thing that I'd put on a pedestal. I needed to pass. I had a car. I wanted to drive my friends around, and it was so important to me that I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I failed. I failed the first time.
No, I think what you're talking about there is like it's sort of episode specific. It's specific to a particular situation.
Okay.
example of chronic anxiety I went through. I had a health issue some years ago, and part of that was to have a scan, and I always got really anxious. I thought I was going to die. And the anxiety was such that I couldn't sit down at home. I have to get up and walk about because I wanted to escape, but there's nowhere to escape to, because wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
And the situation was cleared up, and then a year later I went for a scan, to a CT scan in the electric donut.
Yeah.
And my anxiety levels just went through the roof.
Oh, wow.
And it took 2 weeks for them to return to normal. And in that time, I was actually amused by my own response. It's like I didn't feel frightened, but I had all the physical manifestations of fear because the adrenaline was flowing.
So were you almost standing on the outside looking at yourself being anxious because you know almost how to cope with it?
Yeah. It was a really odd situation to be in. And I guess it's that, the knowledge I've got of working with anxiety, I could see that on myself. But even then, as a counsellor, I couldn't switch it off. Because it was an automatic brain response.
Yeah, so no one's immune.
Yeah, exactly. So that situation there reminded me of that time when I thought, oh no, I'm going to die. And it was just, oh no, I'm going to die again was the feeling, although I knew it was fine. It was just a checkup scan.
It's interesting as well. Do you feel more weight and gravitas on yourself because you're in a position of being a counsellor or being a person that helps people that, oh no, I shouldn't be feeling this way?
Absolutely. That was a huge multiplier for me with anxiety, and continues to be if I don't watch it. Of, I should be better at this.
Yeah.
And, should.
Like, I'm human.
Yeah, should is a word I really try and get my clients to avoid. Should and shouldn't. Who said?
Yeah.
What you're basing it off of.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, just accept who you are and what's going on.
Exactly.
Because it only makes anxiety worse when you tell yourself you're failing.
I feel the same way with the word need. It's like, I need to go to the gym.
Yeah.
Oh, that seems like a lot of pressure there. But I want to go to the gym. That feels like, it's you deciding to go.
Exactly.
Rather than basing off of something.
I need to do something is just a way of saying I'm not doing it, but I'm going to feel guilty for not doing it.
That's so true.
It's putting that extra guilt trip on yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, I always struggle if we're all sharing our words that we don't like. I don't like quite. When being a designer, when someone says, it's quite nice. No, it's not. You like it or you don't. And it's not a problem if you want to change it, that's fine. But let's not pretend because we're wasting each other's time. And it's quite this or quite that. It's like, have a reaction and it's fine. But I think because people are so conscious about upsetting each other or whatever it is, so for me, it's always that. And that kind of...
If you to see it in an American context, here's the thing for you, because in America, quite means exactly, totally, perfectly.
Really?
Oh, really?
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. That's
but
why
I'm guessing you're not dealing with... Well, you are dealing with American clients quite a lot, so...
Yeah, because some Brits have trouble with that in the States. What do you think of my performance? Oh, it's quite good. Oh, all right then.
Oh, that's interesting. There you go. You've been fine all this time, dude.
I've been excellent.
You
all
just
this time. I've been struggling. With all my
How could anyone
friends.
come to any other conclusion about you?
Trust me.
I something I don't think we mentioned yet, but I think I'm nuanced on this point. But mentioning it as well, I think it's a really good thing to do if you're anxious about getting on a stage or doing a thing. I found it's really helped me and really hindered me by mentioning it. So I think that the advice here is do it to the right person. Because if I've said to the wrong person, I'm really anxious.
How do you know the right person?
And that's probably the nuanced element. Know the person, because I've said it before to somebody and then they've got anxious from that, and it sort of exacerbated that. And both
You've
of
come
us
off a performance, gone, oh my god, I was terrified. There's $1,000. Good luck.
Yeah, but both of us have sort of riled each other up, or they've just sat there and said nothing. And I'm like, should I have even said something to that person? Because are they uncomfortable now? And then you're just in this story in your head. But then I've said it to a colleague or somebody I'm there with, and they've said the perfect thing and the right thing, and then that's helped me sort of diminish and dimmer this feeling. So I do think mentioning it and saying it to somebody can really help, but I think it's balanced, it's grey there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and for me, I think one of the most important things, especially with speaking or any anxiety that you've overcome, is celebrating the success. Finding the positives within that is how I feel, because I know that when I've done speaking in the past and someone's come with me and they've been really worried or whatever it is, And they may have got 60% of it wrong, or they might have stumbled over some words or done something, but there were bits that were amazing.
Yeah.
And you still did
Celebrate
it.
the wins.
So the achievement is huge. It doesn't matter if it's touching a spider or crossing a road or doing whatever it is. You need to celebrate the success, because as a nation, we are down on everything. We're miserable at everything, really. When you speak, how you doing, mate? Yeah, not so bad. Yeah, you're good. It's not so bad. You're good. You're doing all right. You're still okay. So I think celebrating that success, that for me overwrites a lot of memories, because it helps me remember, when I did that with Mikey and he said this was brilliant, that goes as part of my repertoire, because I know that he liked it. But I think sometimes you can take the smallest win out of something and you can just ignore kind of the... take lessons from it, but take the win as well.
Yeah, you just focus too heavily on it, and you're like, I did this wrong, and then this and this. You're like, hang on a minute,
but you got
did
up
this
there.
and this.
You
and
did
this.
it. You stood,
like
and
if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There's a saying that often used amongst the techies in Silicon Valley these days: fail fast, fail often.
Fail forward.
Because the oftener you fail, the more you get the real answer.
Yeah.
So there is no failure anything till you give up trying.
Okay. That's kind of nice.
That's lovely.
There's no such thing as failure, only feedback.
Yeah.
All right.
As it is really just changing the way you see things, isn't it?
Yeah, because that's the thing you've got choice over. You say you don't choose whether you have fear, but you do choose what your reaction to it is, what you think about it, how you define it to yourself, and maybe that's going to change how you feel about it in the future.
I think I do have like one more piece of advice, because what we were speaking about earlier was evolutionary and how we needed anxiety to, or at least awareness. Like there's a predator, it's run at us, we've ran away because we're alert. But we're living outside of our animalistic states a lot of the time now. So technology, film, we're numbed, we've got our phones in our hand all the time. And sort of the only other piece of advice I've got at the moment would be tune out as much as you can as well. Have sort of structure and routine in your life where you go, I'm not going to be in work mode. I'm not going to be in the phone mode a lot of the time. Because for me anyway, if I don't have that routine and structure with it, I'm always just okay, I'll just check emails. Oh, now I've got to check social media. I'm always on it. And I think that is taking me away from my animalistic nature a little bit.
So
and living...
not necessarily tune out, but tune into yourself.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, that's a good shout.
Listen to yourself, because knowing what your internal states are is a way of dealing with it.
Yeah.
Recognising that anxiety and then choosing what you're going to do about it is an important thing, because sometimes you might recognise that there's something coming up, like a driving test. It's reasonable to be anxious about that, but being aware of it might stop you snapping at your wife.
Yeah, that's a great saying what you said there. Yeah, instead of tune out, tune in.
And them knowing that you're going to be worried about it. Because how many times have you had arguments and then you've sat down afterwards and they said, I've been worried about this. You think, gee, well, if you just said, which I know sounds simple, everything's easy when you know the answers.
And sometimes fear will flip into anger, into rage.
Yeah, always.
If you push a frightened dog into a corner, the dog might be terrified, but you push it hard enough, it's going to come out fighting.
Yeah.
I do think screen time's a good one, though, to get away. I think I did a 12-hour day once. I was just feeling uncomfortable, and I was always on it. And then when it reports back your screen time, I'm like, I've not addressed something here. I'm not feeling well. I'm feeling uncertain about something. I'm not approaching it, and I didn't know what it was, so I just kept doing the phone thing. So being able to tune out of screen time but tune into self.
Yeah, what is it that's driving you to look at that screen all the time?
Yeah.
I think for me, one big thing that I notice is a massive help in our house, and that's with a nearly 14-year-old, 10-year-old, me and my wife, is music. We've got a stereo that's connected to Spotify, and obviously Spotify is just insane the amount of different tracks, and I play my playlist, and it's not always their favourite, but once I get back in from picking one of them up, when the other two get in, there's already music on. Kettle's boiling, so I'm in a bit of a flow state. So regardless of how bad your day's been, you're walking into quite a mellow state, and it's quite
vibration.
It's a real good vibe, and I've noticed a massive difference between having the music on and not having it on. And I'm not saying it works for everyone, but for me, sometimes I can be anxious about them getting home, because having kids is, you're always worried, and you don't know at the moment they're going through this change and that change, and this has happened, that's happened. So I want to see them and embrace them, but I know they don't want to see me because they're 14. Why would they want to see their dad? So you're like, how you doing, mate? It's like, oh, a terrible day. And I'm more anxious about that than anything else because I want to be a part of their lives, but you can't be too much. So by putting the music on and sort of making this safe environment, I feel for me that it helps quite a lot.
There has to be science
and
there.
You're also awareness of your own internal states and looking to comfort yourself.
Yeah.
Because no one else can fix it for you.
Yeah, true.
Often we're looking for other people to solve things for us, take our anxiety away, and we can only do it for ourselves.
Yeah, and that can lead to a lot of disappointment as well. You know, when you're expecting other people to do it and they don't do it. If you're not stood outside yourself, looking at yourself as if to say, that's not going to happen, or like you will tell me on a Friday night, why are you thinking that? That's what you're in a obviously not in a professional counselling element, but in a way to tell me that's you're not thinking about this rationally.
Yeah.
Which helps. Because whatever I'm expecting someone to fix something they don't know about, it's my own fault. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
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 The only thing we've got any chance of having any control over is ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's tricky enough. But we ain't going to control anyone else.
No.
So, sort it out for yourself as best you can. Seek professional help if you need to.
Yeah.
Because some things you can't do it on your own. You need help.
Have you noticed an uptake in people seeking professional help? I know obviously it's your industry, but I know back in the day for someone to say, I need to see a counsellor or a psychologist or whatever for stress or anxiety, it wasn't seen as the thing to be done. Whereas I'm glad that now it is more recognised that to be able to talk about stuff is okay. It's not a chink in the armour. It's all right to be able to, I don't know. I don't know if it was just a toxic masculinity that people would say, oh, you want to go, you're stressed? Well, and I don't like that. I think if it helps you, you need to be able to do it.
It's not unusual by any means for me to have typically a male client saying, I never thought I'd be the sort of person that would need this. And that's the expectation that there's some weakness involved in needing help. I want to finish on a final thought, is that what we typically think of as strength is actually weakness. And what we think of a weakness is actually strength. So that typical thing of being the strong, silent type is actually someone who's terrified of being overwhelmed by their emotion and not being able to cope with it.
Okay.
So that is a kind of brittle weakness because it's going to fail when it gets pushed too far.
Yeah.
Real strength is being able to show vulnerability.
Yeah.
Real strength is being able to say to people, hey, I'm struggling here. Because also you'll find it enormously enhances your relationships. So just being snappy with everyone because you're frightened and not telling them about that, it's just going to damage your relationships. But saying to someone who cares about you, hey, I'm struggling with this at the moment, might help.
I can relate to that from recent. Like, we're doing this event on the farm and we're trying to sell tickets, but I was really trying to put on a front of, we're doing cool, we're going to be good, we're going to be this. But then with Chrissy and my partner, I'm like, I don't think we're selling enough tickets. We need to cover the basis. And then being able to go and do a video and say, hey guys, this is where we're actually at, this is what's truly happening, the authentic self comes out, people know everything, and then there's no expectation now. You just feel complete relaxed in self because you're like, I've said it all now, it's out. I've been vulnerable to say this is what's actually happening, and honestly it takes everything away. It's such a good feeling afterwards.
Yeah.
So own it, be yourself. You're the best person to be yourself. You're the perfect person. No one can do a better job at being you than you.
It's the only thing that makes you unique as well. All them little quirks and flaws and parts of you.
I'd be super interested if people feel comfortable, obviously when this is on YouTube, if they want to leave a comment, if there is a particular coping method, if there's something that you've done, and it doesn't necessarily have to be physical, it could be a music or whatever it is, but if you can put that in that someone else can relate to or someone picks up on, because we haven't got all the answers, we know we haven't got all the answers, but essentially what we want to build is a community of people that can support each other or just prop each other up a little bit to go, oh, I had a piece of blue tack in my pocket I used to mould, which I did at school. It was before fidget spinners, but I would fiddle with blue tack.
Yeah.
And it would center me long enough to keep me sat still so I could concentrate on the lesson. And I know that sounds insane, but that was one of my things, and it helped. It's got me to where I am now. But if there's something that someone can add then surely that's not a bad thing.
Whatever
Collective.
whatever works.
Yeah.
And so just finally to remind you, if the anxiety feels like it's getting too great, it will pass. Breathe. 3 in, 3 out, hold for 3. Center yourself, touch, come back into the here and now. And don't avoid stuff if you can help it. Press on in. Okay, well, that's going to do us for today, I think. Thanks very much. And I hope to speak to you next time. Bye, boys. Thanks a lot.
Take it easy.
Nice.